And we were in these very large theaters that they were using for the Children's Theater Festival, so we knew we'd have a largely family audience.
Yeah.
As we tended to anyway, but with the emphasis on kids. And so I was doing my Julia Childish routine, and this is a volunteer piece where I bring up a kid to volunteer.
Yeah.
And this was a really fun piece for me to do that I did for years. At the end, I would knight the volunteer. They would spin a plate on a sword that I would use as a Japanese spoof and a spinning plate stick, and they would be spinning 2 plates. And at the end, I would knight them with the sword. I would pronounce them a knight of the round kitchen table. So it was a fun moment. We got a laugh. And I think in the Hong Kong show, maybe they had told us that we could still speak English or modify somehow, but I was still going to be doing this for sure because it was involving a child volunteer. And so when that part came around, I had this little lead-in, and then I'd go out into the audience and get someone, right? Mm-hmm. And I was usually trying to be pretty picky about the age group, because if they were too young, it could be a little too heavy for them, holding these things up. It could be uncomfortable. Yeah. And if they were too old, it was sort of really came across as a non-trick, because they were a bit like, so what? All I'm doing is spinning these. So I was looking for somebody, maybe in that the age range would have been like generally like maybe 8 or 7 to 10 or something like that. Yeah. And also somebody who seemed ready to come up and do it. So some audiences, you only didn't have that many choices in the age group, but whatever happened there in Hong Kong, I go out into the audience like I normally do, and when I find a kid, like every other kid starts like following me, and the one kid started chasing me. Right? What happened was I tried to get the kid up on stage, and like a whole bunch of kids started following.
Ah, yes, I do that.
So like this long line of kids, and they're all coming up. And that was, I think, when I decided to sort of keep moving. And so I ended up going all the way around the back of the theater. And by that time, it was becoming a bit of a joke. And they were all following me. So imagine I'm running, and they're all chasing me all around the back of the house. This giant size theater. And they chase me back, and when I go up on stage, there's still a bunch of people coming up on stage. And somehow we managed to get most of them to leave, but really 3 of them were hanging out on stage. They never had anything close to this happen.
They were still on stage, the last 3.
3 of them were on stage instead of 1. And one of the 3 was a really young one, like virtually a toddler. Yeah. And, nobody was doing anything about it. Toddler was there. And so I kind of diplomatically, okay, we'll have 2 volunteers, and I'll give each one of them something to spin. And I even came up with something to hand. I think it was the shtick shabab, as I called it. I had an item that I was able to. I put the little one up, sitting on this road case shelf that was there. Sitting on a box. Yeah. And that seemed to work. And I gave them something to spin with. And I thought, okay, I've solved the problem now. They'll be perfectly happy to sit here and wait for me to come and spin the plate, right?
Yeah.
And so I got something going with the other 2, but this little one just became kind of inconsolable, and I wasn't sure what I could do differently if it wanted to be part of the act, but then I didn't seem happy being part of the act. Really, it probably was just thinking about following the others around, and I don't know if they were siblings. They weren't really particularly acting like it. These kids can't all have had the same parents. I mean, there were too many of them. So again, this went on for quite a while, and nobody coming up, like no parents sort of coming to the foot of the stage, like, come here, dear, or something.
Oh, no.
Like who to return. Exactly. And I think it was a translator who ultimately bailed me out and sort of came out and carried the kid, because then I was in a bad position to leave the stage, having brought up other kids.
Yeah.
And I think she was the one. I think she might have actually taken them backstage at that point.
Brilliant. So that was Cindy Marvell talking about a difficult show in Hong Kong. And today we're talking to Cindy Marvell, the fabulous, amazing juggler. You can check her out all over YouTube and the internet. Just type in Cindy, C-I-N-D-Y, Marvell, M-A-R-V-E-L-L. Her website's coming out soon, cindymarvell.com. This is the first interview I've done on Skype for a while, and I forgot about the time delay. So sometimes it sounds like I'm interrupting her. I'm not, it's just a time delay, okay? Now, to keep my costs down, only the 3 most recent episodes are available on iTunes and Podomatic. For all the other older episodes of this podcast series, then please visit my website, www.thebigbenshow.com. Go to the main page, scroll down, there's a complete list of links to every single episode. Also, I'm always looking for more people to interview, so if you're an entertainer or you know an entertainer, then do contact me at ben@thebigbenshow.com. As usual, all the names, links and websites mentioned in this podcast will be listed in this episode's description, so just scroll down and check out what you need and click away. Cindy Marvell is an amazing juggler. In this podcast we talk about how she got started, the juggling scene in America in the 1980s. We talk about how she won the World Championships for juggling, solo juggling, at the IJA, the International Juggling Association, in 1989. And we talk all about her early career. This is going to be a 2-parter. In the second part we'll go on to her later career working with Lazer Vaudeville. But for the time being, let's go and talk to Cindy and how she began. Okay, Cindy Marvell. I've looked at some of your videos. Oh, let me start right at the beginning. Way back when I started juggling in the late 80s, early 90s, I became president of the Oxford University Juggling Club, and at our first big party, I thought I'll get a video. So I went to the Oddballs juggling shop in London, and I bought a VHS video of an IJA convention. All of the jugglers in Oxford University sat down, had a Christmas dinner, and watched the video, and there you were on it, winning the whole thing. And here I am, I don't know, about more than 20 years later, and I'm actually talking to you, so it's amazing.
And it's funny you should mention the Oddballs, because the last time I did this type of interview, it was actually with Susie Oddball, as she had a connection to a radio station and was interviewing people. The initial subject was a book I had written about shadow puppetry with a collaborator, but
I know, you've written a book.
The last 20 years of what had gone on in juggling since we've seen each other.
Isn't it amazing?
We had a big reunion at the British Juggling Convention last April as I decided to go.
Oh, wow. I mean, juggling is still a small world, isn't it? It's amazing. I mean, you can see someone in a video, and then one day you'll eventually meet them. And the jugglers do meet up, and it is still quite a small world. It's amazing.
Yes, and when I was at the International Jugglers Association, I mentioned that I was writing about the convention. There were a lot of Japanese jugglers winning the competitions, and so of course there's a whole network there. So now we've got more friends from Japan.
Yeah, you suddenly that's another point.
You wouldn't be jugglers there; you would just juggle for the public, and now there's a small, big world of Asian jugglers.
Yeah, that's it. You think you know the juggling world, and then you find out there's a whole other community that in other parts of the planet that you can meet up with.
Yes, there were Asian jugglers who were very specialized in what they did with boomerangs and fans and tops and things, but it was a certain kind of traditional juggling, and Diabolo was associated with China, but now the juggling has modernized, so they're doing more of the types of skills that you would see in IJ competitions, albeit with an emphasis on Diablo, but
they love it, though.
They're sort of meat and potatoes, club and ball jugglers and ring jugglers.
Wow.
People doing that type of diversity of skill.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
it's kind of associated with Western Europe and America
yes, yes. Okay,
and Russia.
looking at the videos I've seen of you, this is just a random question just to get us right involved. Do you prefer talking while you juggle, or do you prefer juggling to music? Do you have a favourite? Because I've seen
Well,
you
that's a
doing.
good question, because coming up I'm doing an independent show at the Boulder International Fringe Festival.
Yes, I had a look.
And the last time I did this actually was 5 years ago, and I put in a lot of the poetry routines where I recite poetry and bits from Shakespeare and juggle at the same time. And the juggling illustrates the poetry. And I started doing that when I was a college student.
I saw you doing an
It's a little
unusual.
bit of talking comedy with the audience, because I used to do that a lot, actually. That was the most common show I did before I got so many stage opportunities where I could juggle to music.
Right.
Professionally, I was often asked to do this kind of all-around comedy juggling show. But then there were routines to music that I also did in that show 5 years ago. So now, once again, I'm looking at a combination. And I also have collaborators in this show, so I'm not trying to bite off quite as much myself in the hour. But some different skills that I didn't used to have, like a little bit of aerial fabric even.
Yes.
Teaming with a more professional fabric artist so people can have the full experience.
Yeah, yeah. So, I saw an unusual video. Yeah, right. You were very young, and you were doing a juggling routine, talking about nuclear power. Do you remember that?
Because you saw that. Yes, that was a PBS special, and Elizabeth Swados, who wrote the Broadway show Runaways, and she's written several books as well, had a grant from PBS and related entities to do this. And so performing children were recruited, and some of them were more like a double Dutch troupe with more of a street performing history.
Right.
And others were kids from an agency, like an acting agency. And I think I got involved through a friend who was a producer who knew of this juggling talent. And so I was the one juggler in it, but every kid was supposed to have some type of specialty, be it acting or electric guitar or something. And the theme was, what do children think of when they think of the bomb? That was actually the title.
Right.
The New York Times kind of cut that down to children in the bomb. But so this was when I was a high school student in the 1980s.
Yeah.
I was in the class of 1984.
Okay.
Talking about politics. It was, the year of George Orwell's novel.
Yes.
Projected to be.
Yes.
So it was the Big Brother is watching you, and that was the year of my high school graduation. But shortly before that, I was in this TV special, and the way it worked, the children were supposed to write routines that had something to do with commentary on nuclear war and nuclear weapons. And I have to say, I'm just thinking back now that I think my routine was one of the only ones that really addressed that directly.
Good.
I think the other routines talked about the pressures children face,
Oh, okay.
be that poverty or private school or
Sure.
parochial school, whatever they were up against and trying to overcome or rebel against.
Yeah.
And it was sort of an abstract connection the viewer could make. But mine actually addressed it, and maybe this is one of the things they appreciated at the audition, that I went to a high school called the Ethical Culture School. It's
Wow.
also called Fieldston, but it was technically you had to take an ethics class. And it just so happened that the ethics teacher was also involved at Columbia University in a field that had to do with the politics of nuclear war and the perspective of how can we avoid this arms race and the politics of it, and
Yeah.
what it means to people's daily lives to be shown these maps. Of course, in World War II, it was like a reality that they were seeing all this. My parents were children then, so they sometimes talk about what that was like.
Sure.
But-
Let's go right back to the start then, to your family, your childhood. You were born in, I guess, the mid to late 60s. You're a couple of years older than me, I guess.
It's 1966, like The Root.
Okay.
I spent so much
Route
time
66.
on a touring show.
And you grew up in Manhattan, is that right?
I did, on the Upper West Side. And later there were some noted jugglers that moved right into my neighborhood. Some of the Flying Karamazov brothers
Really?
lived there at a certain point. Some of them are still there.
And
The musician-composer, some of the other families, people had families
So-
there.
so, was your childhood? Did you have was it an artistic family? Because
Yes, artistic intellectual.
yes,
I thought of them as more intellectual actually when I was growing up, but they performed. They went to very good colleges and universities. My dad was first in his class at Harvard, and my mother
Wow.
went to Bryn Mawr.
wow,
And they considered themselves academics just by nature, I guess you could say.
yeah,
But they also got out and did a lot of performing because they were interested in music. And they met as voice students at Tanglewood.
okay,
Now, I can tell you this is something I struggle with a bit, with intonation. And I played cello growing up, a challenging instrument because you have to know intonation. It really made me
right,
tackle. But I believe they had a flair for this, and they had, my dad used to say that he had perfect pitch. Then he said it became a little bit relative, and my mother had relative pitch. So they were well talented with this. And so they would perform sometimes in Gilbert and Sullivan groups. In those days, they were informal, and later that group became a professional group in New York, like D'Oyly O'Cart, but the New York Gasp, they called it, Gilbert and Sullivan Players. And the closest I came to that was playing cello for an orchestra in college at Oberlin that performed Gilbert and Sullivan.
yeah. I can see. You've come from an intellectual, artistic background. I mean, you're doing at high school. You're doing a PBS show where you're doing juggling and talking about nuclear war on the one hand, this hand on the other hand, this. And I also
Right.
saw you did some live TV shows. If I can't dance, you can keep your revolution when you were a kid.
Oh, that's funny. That was the show my mother was on, but I did some guest appearances with my siblings on that show, and sometimes solo since I was the oldest. This gets into an odd branch of my mother's diverse career history. My
Yeah.
dad got on the math and physics track.
Right.
Well, he went to Harvard Medical School at one point, but changed over to physics since he had some renown as a student making a discovery in math. And then he became a Columbia physics professor. Was tenured at Columbia for my whole life, from before I remember, and he only just recently had an office there and was gone beyond the retirement age.
Yeah.
As a collaborator, he's still collaborating with some of the same physicists. And my mother had more of the diverse history of, especially women in those days, often started a family and then maybe they'd go back to some career pursuit. They weren't always encouraged that way. And I know she felt that she was encouraged to either get married or get a job like a teacher or a nurse or a secretary or something like that. It wasn't as ambitious
Yeah.
that what her parents would feel that they would encourage her to do. And so her first job after having kids, as she saw it, was being a choir singer in churches, even though
Yes.
we were technically Jewish. She sang in church choirs. I later became a handbell ringer. My sister did that too. And then at a certain point, she got into stand-up comedy.
Yes.
This was a lot of fun for us, and it was the age, I guess, when sort of ordinary people were getting into that, but it was a little bit before everybody was doing it. So it's a little more unusual that your mom would be doing it. I didn't know anybody else's mom would do that.
Yeah.
Or even anyone else's dad, actually, in high school. And she could also write funny songs because she could play her own music. She went through a creative period of songwriting. Some of them were just funny family songs, and some of them she performed on the TV show based on current events. Sort of a bit of a Saturday Night Live flavor of
Yeah.
current events and contemporary characters that she would come up with. And she'd write her own material because it was a cable show.
It's amazing.
It was more informal. Yeah, so they didn't have writers who would write for her. She wrote a different sketch every week.
So
And
is it
a couple of times would involve us in those sketches.
so is it not surprising then that you ended up with an artistic performing career, and are your parents quite supportive of it?
Well, yes, I think they always were. I think they understood it because my dad gave piano recitals and my mother had that performing bent herself. Now she's a very renowned music writer. She really writes a lot about music for different publications. And she had a job with the New York Times for a while.
Wow.
But she's still doing that to this moment. But in her writing, she's writing about performers. So it's something they understand, even though this juggling was coming out of left field. They didn't know the participants.
Yes, how did juggling become your chosen art form? How did that happen?
Well, I got some informal inspiration from my father, and he says it's kind of ironic these days if he hears a reference to it from a newspaper that he taught me to juggle, because he feels it wasn't quite like that, and he didn't really recall how he learned to juggle, and this was just before all those books and videos became popular. So it actually took me a while to learn. He juggled 3 balls around the house some. Sometimes he'd do it at a physics party, and he also balanced objects, but he wasn't doing it to try to make a real performance career out of it.
Just as an aside here, have you noticed that a lot of physicists are good at juggling?
Yes, math and physics type.
I know, isn't that strange?
I find it with that a bit, but more people have that other interest, and I think it's because it's like a puzzle, and especially physics. I mean, juggling really is an expression of how physics works.
It's physics in motion, yeah.
Yeah, it's physics in motion. It's an illustration of those principles. I guess you can ask Greg Kennedy about that, because he has a show called Theorem.
There you are.
You might understand it even more so. But I think that's true, and I think that was the way my father saw it, what his connection to it was, the fascination of that bit of a puzzle of how this works.
Okay.
But he had no idea that I would get so involved in it.
Yeah, that's what I want to find out.
To do it in my 8th grade talent show. I'd seen now and then a previous student do a juggling routine.
Yeah.
And I was ambitious because I couldn't really juggle 3 balls when I got the idea, and so I had to figure it out. It had actually taken me 2 years to learn 3 balls, because I could do the exchange but didn't understand it intellectually, how that pattern worked.
Yeah.
And my father didn't really have a roadmap to explain it. I don't think he really remembered exactly learning. His sister could do it too, and later learned 5 balls, so she's technically a bit more advanced with it even, but somehow they both learned, and my grandmother on their side taught me some ball bouncing moves that, kids would play when she was growing up. But I'm not sure that she actually taught them to juggle, even though she also had that mathematical talent. She was a writer as well.
Okay, so much to talk about.
And short stories. Yeah.
Cindy, so much to talk about. So let me summarize. So you're teaching yourself how to juggle, and there's not. There's obviously there's.
It took me 2 years.
Yeah, there's no. I mean, nowadays you can just go on YouTube and you can find hundreds of videos teaching you how to do all kinds of tricks. And then in my day, at least there were books and there were clubs. But when you were doing it, there weren't even many books or clubs to join. You were just teaching yourself from scratch.
Exactly, and just after I learned, I think Juggling for the Complete Klutz came out. Just after I'd learned everything.
Wasn't that an important book?
Yeah, that made it faster. But in some ways it was a strong way to learn, because I learned 2 in 1 hand first, and sometimes I wonder if that's why I later became a strong 4-club juggler, because of that 2 in 1 hand. It was a difficult way to learn, because it's harder to learn 2 in 1 hand. It's faster. It's sort of more non-negotiable than the exchange. And one day I was doing 5 on each side, and then I would go down to 4 on each side, 3, 2, 1. Oh my gosh, I'm juggling!
Wow.
Eureka! I suddenly realized how it worked. So, talking about a homegrown talent,
but you're very good.
I'll try to remember to let people experiment a bit more.
Cindy,
so they can also take a bit of that scenic route and maybe be a little stronger when they get it.
That's a good point. Now
you're 1, 2, 3, here it is.
You're a very good juggler. So when did you realize that you had a natural talent for it? I was
pretty ambitious considering where I started, wasn't I?
Yeah.
How did I know that I could perform this?
Because there's no one else to compare you to.
Shortly after that time, I would meet other jugglers.
Right, okay.
And so they would teach and encourage me. And that summer, that after I did the 8th grade talent show, it was my last year at my favorite summer camp, and there was a counselor there who juggled, and he could flash 5, and so he would work on a lot of tricks with me, and we did a little show at the end of the summer. And then somebody put up signs. They were starting a juggling club in Central Park in New York City, and my dad and I were the first ones to show up. To meet Steve Schneider. He might have been a grad student at the time, but he said, well, I didn't know who would come. I just put up signs. And then the next week they put an ad in the Village Voice, and they got a lot of jugglers, a lot of beginners, but a lot of jugglers. And I guess through going to these clubs, there were a lot of adults juggling there. Sometimes I was better than the adults. You kind of got a feel for how fast you were learning things.
Okay.
And I was very avid to learn the next thing. If I saw a juggler, just nothing could stop me. I would just run to that person, want to learn whatever they would teach me.
What kind of is this the mid-80s?
Yeah, this would have been early 80s.
Early 80s. Okay, early 80s.
Yeah. Because in 1989 I won the IJ, so there had to be a lot of fun.
Ah, you must have practiced a lot by then, yes.
Two in one hand experiment, right?
I think it might have started a bit earlier in America than it did in the UK, because in England, the juggling kind of mini craze of conventions and juggling shops opening up, that began in the late 80s, kind of early 90s. But for you, I think in America it must have started a bit about maybe 10 years earlier, even.
Yeah, it was more of a hotbed. And again, had I been an adult, I might have gotten into that network a little bit more. Like, I know Brian Dubay had a studio that sometimes jugglers would meet there.
Yeah.
But it was, I was a teenager who lived I wasn't even, how old was I when we're talking about 13, and I lived way uptown when I was getting into it. So it wasn't so kid-oriented then either.
No.
But until I went to the IJ, I didn't really see other kids juggling at that level. It's not like I knew another juggler like that.
Yes.
Around the block or something. It was not an after-school activity. There were no youth programs, no after-school classes. If I hadn't happened to meet that juggler, it wasn't a circus camp, it was a nature camp with activities and hiking. If I hadn't happened to meet him, I wouldn't have had that boost to the next point in juggling. Ditto the other juggling mentors at first. And this was a very good experience for me that I might not have had otherwise had there been more kids programs. In 1982 and 3, there was a program at SUNY Purchase, and this was actually at the time we were filming that PBS special you spoke of.
Right.
To the point that I was going back and forth to do the filming because that was our filming week when it started in the same area. But it was a program taught by Bob Berky, Fred Garbo, and Michael Moschen. And it was a circus sleepaway for adults at the university.
Okay, let me just stop you there. So, you're studying with Fred Garbo and Michael Moschen. They're teaching you. Wow.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And Bob Berky, although I think I was a little taken aback when I saw Bob Berky's photo in the brochure and realized, gee, if I want to do this, to study with Michael Moschen, who was the one that I knew of.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to do some of this clown theater. And I thought, okay, I'm not so swift at all the performance skills, so that's probably a good thing. So it was an all-around, all-day program, and I learned to ride unicycle there. It would go on at night. It would go on, we'd have a dance class in the morning, and then they'd break it down into classes. So we'd have an all-around acrobatics class, Bob's clown character class, and we'd be encouraged to put together pieces and show the group. And, of course, Michael's class, and he'd have a mixture. The second year, there were more advanced jugglers in the group, but he'd have a group of advanced jugglers and then maybe a slightly bigger group of the beginning jugglers. But he would teach us one-ball exercises, and because of that, we'd all start together as a group because nobody else had tried these before. And it wasn't so much the contact rolling juggling that you see him doing.
Right.
But it was other kinds of juggling involving tossing. And sometimes I teach these skills if I have a little longer to teach beginners. Mm-hmm. It's a neat thing because it's kind of giving them what I had through spending so much time throwing balls against the wall in different ways and playing around with these exercises my grandmother taught me. You get more comfortable with one ball before you go into the panic of all these objects coming at you. You get a little more confidence that way, which I naturally had from the scenic route that I took. Yeah. And so what I noticed is, when I teach people this way, they do get a little faster into the cascade when they learn the exchange and so on, because it actually seems a little bit easier than some of these other moves. And he said we were free to do any moves that he taught us in the class, because he did feel kind of proprietary starting around that time, because there were some unfortunate incidents of people just kind of ripping off his act in a pretty straightforward manner.
Yeah.
But he was very generous.
Did he have his big kind of
patience with the students? A very intense kind of introverted person, but he was very patient with the students.
Did he have his big? I'm a bit of a. I don't know a huge amount about Michael Moschen, but did he have his big triangle thing at that stage where he bounced?
I think that he came up with that later. I don't think that that was something he was doing at Purchase, but this was a time period when the reason they were all three teaching together, they were performing together as a group called Fool's Fire.
Okay.
I'm not sure if Dubé has video of this. There's a poster of it that was at his studio, but the Fool's Fire had solo pieces in it, and one of them was Michael Moschen's contact juggling. The other moves he was working on then, it was more like these long props, like the half moons, maybe the S curves. I think even the sticks and hoops, I think, were more later. That was, I think, a little bit later that he got into that, when he was performing at BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music, and the Next Wave Festival, when he did that show. But that I saw a little bit later. So this time period was very productive for them, and I often marveled at how they could put out the energy to be performing together as a group and teaching this all-day intensive.
Yeah.
Which, granted, they would split into different parts, and sometimes they would take each other's classes, sometimes not. But they would rehearse, and Michael would go off and rehearse alone a lot. We weren't supposed to watch, really, but sometimes we would sort of look through the door for it to exist. And he was always walking across campus with some large outsized sculptor prop that he was going to work on.
Yeah.
And he was just known for how many hours he could spend at that practice. I mean, I worked my way up as a solo artist to practicing 6 hours a day at the time, like leading up to the IJ.
Yeah.
I was doing that. But often it was more like a 2-hour practice when I started doing it daily. And then there were times with groups later where I would practice many hours if you were to put together all the time we spent as a group and a solo.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I went into group juggling is that it made it a little easier on me than just the intensity of the solo. Sometimes it was just a little easier on my neck and shoulders to have that diversity of activity, I think. But part of the reason.
Can I ask you a specific...
for how many hours he would spend on this.
Can I ask you a specific question, Cindy? So, how do you have after practicing juggling for so many years? Do you have any particular methods that you use when you practice? Is there, for example, for me, one of the best things for me was when I was practicing by myself, I built a little studio in my apartment with one wall was just a huge mirror, and I just used to go in there for hours and hours.
My room has something like this here.
Okay. Is there anything specific that you've is it the hours? Is it the amount of time you put into it? Is that the main thing? Just never giving up hour after hour, or?
I think that hour after hour has something to do with it.
Yeah.
In that I know I couldn't have achieved what I did without some of that. And I wasn't doing it 12 hours a day, unless maybe you want to pick out some days where I was in group collaborations with rehearsals and tech and all that. But I'm not sure would have worked for me anyway, because I don't think being left alone that many hours with props for 12 hours would work for me. But
is it better working in a group with other people around you, inspiring you? Is that a better way to?
Yeah, I think partly why I got drawn to groups was the dynamic of the performance and just having teammates and what you did. I mean, when I was practicing solo, as many people do, I kind of grouped together with jugglers to practice. I had some pretty distinguished practice mates leading up to that IJA competition, because I guess for several years there had been this informal practice group with Barrett Felker, Alan Jacobs, and Mark Nizer, who was in New York at the time.
Wow.
And so there would be some informal coaching that went on, career coaching as well. And as I started in juggling, right, it started through meeting other jugglers and their sharing and encouragement, and so it was natural for me to do that and be involved in that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's a little more inspiring if you're going to show up to practice, because they're showing up to practice. Sometimes I liked it alone. Sometimes I kind of relished that side of it too.
Yeah.
The solitary pursuit side.
Like I can remember.
When I was practicing solo, I kind of appreciated if people came by and gave it a cheer or encouraged it a little bit, just to sort of take you out of the headset and remind
And-
me of
and
the
was-
imagined effect it can have.
And Cindy, was performing in public a thing for you yet, or were you just doing it for the love of learning a new skill, a new trick?
Right, well, I think I had performing opportunities all along, pretty much starting from that 8th grade talent show,
Yes.
because I would get involved in juggling in events around the city. If my mother, who was at that point involved in the press and writing world of the music business, if she would hear of an audition sometimes, like at Carnegie Hall or Avery Fisher Hall, I would go to audition, and then those people would suggest me for something else. So I had some neat gigs. One of my first gigs was at the Carnegie Hall Serenades Festival, and I still have a poster with my name on it from that time. Cindy Friedberg, if you will.
Ah, that's your family name, Friedberg.
Well, so I wasn't that petite, but I was a teenager. It was neat because at the time I was taking a ballet class at Carnegie Hall, and I wasn't going to be performing in there, but that was more for the love of learning. I did a lot of things for the love of learning, that maybe I would take part in a recital, but I had no expectation that I would be performing professionally as a dancer or a musician. Maybe the perception being from the background I had and growing up in New York that you had to be through the roof to do that.
Yeah.
But so I was someone who kept up with a lot of activities, and sometimes it might even seem I had to spend more time on those. I'm not sure, but I think one difference was that in juggling I was getting performing opportunities, and I was getting jugglers encouraging me, and they would say, "You're going to be performing this."
Yeah.
And they would say they like my style, or even though for some reason I might not have been someone you would type as a performer, I liked to get involved in performances, whether it was the class play or whatever. It was exciting to me to be involved.
Yeah.
And so...
Cindy, I've got some big questions then. Some big questions. I'm guessing that IJA in 1989 was a huge turning point.
Yes.
So let's talk about, are there any, I guess also going to this circus school where there's people like Fred Garbo and Michael Moschen was a huge turning point. Are there any, what are the key turning points when you're a teenager that eventually, when you look back on your life, think that was a big reason why I became a professional juggler?
I do think the Antic Arts training with Berky, Garbo, and Moschen opened the door for me to see this is more than just getting a gig at a festival.
Yeah.
Because they were creating theatrical pieces.
Mm.
And I'd actually sought out that opportunity because I'd seen Michael Moschen perform in the Big Apple Circus, got home and called him up, looked him up in the phone book and called him and reached him. And he said, well, he talked to me about what I was doing and said he wasn't teaching at the moment, but he might be in the future. And then I saw the brochure.
Wow,
so
you actually tracked it down and phoned him.
I tried to, there was nobody behind this project. Like, as I said, my parents, while they were encouraging, wouldn't have known this juggler that, unless maybe they'd seen Michael Moschen in the newspaper with the Big Apple Circus, but somebody might have gone with me to see it, I guess. But nobody told me to do that, and I wasn't quite so known for being outgoing then, and just... Maybe my mom gave me the idea to see if he was in the phone book. It would be like her to do that, but it
Brilliant.
was like nobody telling me. So it was pretty unusual just seeing a legend like that and calling them up. But it says this is what I was saying about Michael. He talked to me.
That's fantastic.
He didn't just say you're silly, you're a teenager. He's asking me questions about what I was doing with juggling, and said I could probably benefit from instruction, and that he might be teaching in the future. But definitely having that exposure to how to create theatrical pieces and seeing that there was that type of performance opportunity, in addition to, well, some of those I had on my own, but say a lot of the time I would get hired or asked to be the entertainer at a festival. And maybe if I had just seen a career before me only doing that kind of gig, even though it was fun.
Wow.
Okay, and still do it sometimes. I guess.
Yeah, I'm amazed. So you're a teenager. You're being invited to perform at festivals, but you're also realizing that there's a whole theatrical, artistic side that you can get involved in, and you're
right, and I would perform in our high school cabaret, and I would put together routines to music, but yeah, when I went out and performed, it wasn't always routines to music. Well, it could be something like the film that you mentioned, or it was towards the end. I think just as I was going to college, I started doing some street performing around Central Park,
Right.
and in that museum there.
And you were also going to the...
But I didn't really get into a lot of street performing till after college, when I auditioned at South Street Seaport, and for a while was doing a lot of shows there. So yeah, I really became what they would call a jack of all trades, because I went to Japan and did those gigs. That was sort of a combination.
Whoa, Cindy, slow down, slow down, Cindy. You went to Japan?
But this was later.
Okay, yeah, so this
all over the place now. So, well, actually, I could tie it in for you to the IJA turning point.
Okay, yeah. So let's talk about the IJA. Let's talk about the IJA, because I've never been to an IJA.
In 1989, before the IJA, in let's say February of that year, that was my first gig in Japan, and it was at New Holland Village, which is in Nagasaki. They moved it to Sasebo. It became the Huistenbusch. So this was a Dutch theme park with performances. They would bring over, a whole group of American and European performers every year. And as I said, now there are so many jugglers in Japan, I don't know if they need to do that. They've got a group of jugglers. And it sort of enhanced the Dutch atmosphere to have these foreigners, because nobody knew where we were from, right? Who knew? And so it was neat, because you had even though I was a soloist then, that was a nice situation as I got into it, because you had a group of performers you were with. Because as a solo, you're not necessarily with performers, right? You could be, but you're not necessarily with other performers. And so that was inspiring, because we could inspire each other, and there were always some jugglers in the group, and even the other performers, so I'd make friends with. And so we would do 4 shows a day, sometimes more if it was a holiday time. And
wow.
Then I would have this opportunity to practice that I liked, although I had to take a late bus if I wanted to do this. But I would do this. This is almost a daily kind of thing. There was this outdoor stage, but it was, I guess, warm enough weather. What am I saying, February? It was cold when we first got there. I think this opportunity got a little better later. But the first year I was there was a little potential for indoor practice, I remember. Later I was there for 6 months, and also like this place. But so it was a stage with very good visibility. It was like a canvas roof on the stage that went out into like an amphitheater type of audience. And that stage would be free when we were done with the shows. So as long as we were willing to take our own bus back instead of their shuttle offsite, then I was able to stay late. Oh, that's right. This was the first year. I take it back. We didn't have to bus. We could walk back and forth. So yeah, it was easier for me to stay the first year, I guess.
Cindy, how old are you when you go to Japan? How old were you when you went to Japan for the first time?
The year of 1989, I would have been 22.
Wow.
So I graduated college the previous year, right? When I was 21. I guess I was in the younger half of my class.
And Cindy, did you say this is before you won the International Juggling Association?
Yes, I'm saying this was the season leading up to that. So I would practice on this stage, and for me, it was really good practice, because instead of sort of feeling like you sometimes do, I have to go through all these tricks that I already know, those would have already been done. I did a lot of juggling in a fun way, without having to think, okay, I'm doing this whole practice. And so when I went to practice, I felt like I could move ahead, really.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I would do this, but when I was 22, this seemed really good. So I would be like, great, I got the 4 shows done, and now I'm totally warmed up. I've already done 5 clubs and performance. All I have to do is work on the routine I want to make.
Yeah.
And that's when I would work on the IJA routine. And I would work on editing the music down, because it's, if you know, the piece Rhapsody in Blue is actually much longer, so it had to be rearranged and edited, and I was always trying to do this mathematical.
Okay, Cindy, let's talk about something technical with the music. Yeah. So this is in the 80s. So how did you edit it? Did you edit it just by 2 tape cassettes? How did you get that edited in those days?
That's what it would have been, were it not for the sound advice, shall we say, of Alan Jacobs. Because his brother was in audio engineering. And I think this was his connection to juggling at Columbia, because I was there because my dad had that connection. We were all practicing over there, or later at Union Theological. I got hold of that space.
Okay.
taken an Olympus class, but we, yeah, he said, Cindy, you're going to have to go and get this done professionally, and you're going to call one of these places downtown, and they're going to do a reel-to-reel.
Right.
So I actually had to go to, like, somebody's audio shop.
Yes.
With these cassettes, and then he had to put it all on one reel.
Well, exactly, Cindy.
You don't hear, like, clunk.
Yes, Cindy, this exactly. I mean, people don't realise how hard it was to put everything together back in the 80s.
Edits the music that wasn't just like, oh, well, jolly well, okay, sure, put together a brochure. You had to pay a price for somebody to do it.
Yeah.
I probably had to pay like $75 for that service because it would have been clunky. So, yeah, so that's good question. And I could have used the extra minute, but it was only 7 minutes then. They later made it 8 minutes. I don't know that it would have made a great deal of difference, but it's kind of tiring as it was at 7 minutes.
So, Cindy.
On 4 club.
So, Cindy, you've been going to IJEs for quite a few years by now, and you've been practicing while you've been in Japan, and you come back to America, and you take part in the IJA 1989.
Yeah, so I was doing the South Street shows and doing other gigs around the city. Like, I came back to doing what I was doing and practicing with that Star Practice group.
Yeah.
And they all gave me different advice about it, which was great advice. Like, Mark would really coach me in like keeping going, like how to keep going no matter what happens. So he'd confiscate the tape machine if I had the temptation to sort of start over or something.
Oh.
And that was really good, actually, because when I actually did the routine, I don't want to emphasize this, but it was a little shaky right in the beginning, and I had to just forget that and go on. It wasn't actually dropping, but it was a little fishiness with rings. So I right off the bat, it wasn't quite perfect.
Oh.
And
okay, Cindy, I'm going to jump in again. Cindy. I'm going to jump in again. So, when you do have things going wrong in your routines, what is your go-to response? Do you just quickly, as you're doing stuff to music, do you just very quickly try to make as small a deal of it as possible, pick it up, and just get back into it?
Sometimes you can do that. I think that tends to happen, especially if it's really short. And like if it's the individual prop contest, you've only got 2 minutes, and it's like you're going to miss your next. It's just. But it's better, obviously, if you can make light of it somehow. It's also difficult to do that. I did do that in the IJ routine, but I think either it was a little too fast or people weren't really prepared to laugh because it was just like they're all thinking like I'm thinking. Better get on with this. It wasn't funny to drop, or you know what I mean. Like it was just too low to the situation. But most of the time, what I find is, if you're juggling to music, that can be difficult to do if they don't have some comedic knowledge of you.
Right.
So sometimes with the group that could work a little better. Sometimes if I was doing a street show and the whole thing were comedy oriented to begin, then it was much easier. Whereas if you're only presented as somebody juggling to music and you try it just once, you might not have had a comedic history with them for them to get on board with that. With giving you that response.
Yes.
That's what I've noticed. So that can kind of be better if you're sort of engaged in more of an all-around show, or if they've seen you do something that had a bit of character to it. So yeah, that's something that I've noticed. I don't always have the brilliant idea. Sometimes you're just like, oh, just keep going.
Yeah. Cindy, I have another question related to this then. So how do you deal with nerves before you go on? I mean, some people like to warm up and practice and go through their routine before they go on stage, and other people like me, probably wrongly, decide not to practice at all or warm up before they go on stage in case I do drop while I'm practicing, and then that will freak me out. I just go on stage and do it. Do you have any particular?
So you don't like to get involved in second guessing it right before. Yeah, sometimes that's not too helpful. Sometimes it's good to get the drops out, and sometimes it just makes you feel like, oh, shoot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to be concerned about this, especially on short opportunities. It's a bit more difficult. If you have a chance to get on stage a bit longer, and not kind of putting all the eggs in one basket like a competition routine or something.
Yeah.
Those, yeah, I was nervous for those, and routines like that. I didn't have that so much if it were, say, performing in Japan, where I was doing it 4 times a day, right?
Yes.
That was the nice about if I got onto a regular kind of performance. And especially those kinds of shows where you tended to open with something like maybe I'd open with Diablo or, something a little tongue-in-cheek. So it wasn't all about I've got to nail these tricks right away.
Yeah, you can open with a safe Diablo trick or routine that's not too difficult. Like in
competitions, you tend to have some difficulty there, even though I would try to at least try to. This could be one reason. Actually, I think that my style actually changed partly to accommodate this. Because when I started working with a modern dance company, this would have been the season after the IJA, actually. And I was doing, well, I did do it then because it was, somebody was actually asking me how to do this at the juggling club last night, the move where you swing your arms and juggle. I do it with clubs.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
That was a Michael Moschen exercise that he and Garbo and the others, they were trying to get a lot of us to do, because especially in my case, they felt like when I was self-taught that my arms were high, and they were trying to give us more control of having our arms capable of going lower and saying, oh, this will help expand your capabilities and make it more relaxed. So that was sort of an exercise. We didn't develop it with clubs, but then later I developed it with clubs. And actually the year after the IGA, I came up with a lot of new moves, new tricks, actually with both 3 and 4 clubs. I learned more tricks later, as a lot of people did, but so there were all these different kinds of arm circles. They became more dimensional, more multi-dimensional in the arm circles.
Okay.
And yeah, now how did we get into arm circles?
Well, basically, I'll just summarize, because not everybody who listens. So, Cindy, not everybody who listens to my podcast is a juggler. So I'll just summarize a few things. The IJA is the International Juggling Association, and every year they have a competition, and
yes, International Jugglers Association,
and
they have different divisions of the competition.
Yeah.
So when we talk about this one, we're referring to the solo competition. One year I was in teams. They have a juniors. I was in that too, actually.
And and when you win that, you're called the world champion. Is that right?
That's what it says on the trophy.
That's what it says on the trophy. Brilliant. So you win this in 1989, and we were talking about turning points, and I guess that is a turning point. Did you get lots and lots of? You're about 22 years old, so after you win it, do you get lots and lots of more jobs, more interesting people hiring you to do stuff?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that, because the jobs I had immediately after, I'd actually auditioned for before. I remember the very next weekend I was starting at the New York Renaissance Festival, and I did that the following summer as well, and this was something I'd auditioned for with the Shakespeare poetry routines, and they really liked it, and again, I just went out and got that gig through showing up and auditioning.
Right.
And another one was a cruise ship I was on also that following season.
Cindy. Okay, Cindy, I like to talk about this with people as well. How do you find performing in cruise ships? Was there anything difficult?
Yeah, I haven't done it a great deal. This was but a couple of times I did it. Let's see. That first experience was by far the better one. The second time I was just subbing in for someone.
Right.
And it was frankly a mess, because they had the tech was all blown and they didn't have a musical rehearsal. But what was good about this first one was that, although they did have a higher ceiling on that one, I'll say that, some of the juggling might have felt easier. I was good when I did the first one, so I could go down and do some lower 4 club stuff. It wasn't a high ceiling, it was a slanted stage.
Oh!
Try to perform unicycle. And it was Chandra's line. It later became Celebrity, and it was Tony Duncan had recommended me, and there was a production couple that was running the entertainment, and they also saw me perform at Lincoln Center out of doors, because I was a performer on their stages for several years, solo and with groups. Actually, one of those groups was with Hovey Burgess, who's celebrating his 75th birthday extravaganza tomorrow.
Woo!
City, American icon. I used to go to his club passing all-around class. But on the ship, they would put together special routines between me and the dancers. They would integrate it in. They actually wanted me to be an audience member who would get picked to volunteer and then end up in this surprise juggling act.
That sounds fun.
They put out the time into the lead-up and into setting it all up, and they wanted to work in ideas I had. Like, I remember I would do a 3-club routine in my street show. One of the ideas I had was the tricks would symbolize different movies. This is like the kind of silly stuff that I would report for the public sometimes, in gigs and stuff. And because it had to be something anybody could catch on to who was just walking down the street, right?
Oh, of course.
And so they were just, takes on movies like Rocky, and I would do chops, or Back to the Future, and I would do back crosses, things like this. Chariots of Fire, I'd do the running.
Yes!
Trading Places, you can imagine. Several tricks would work for that. So we get into visual puns and stuff. And so with them, I put together, we got some theme songs. I had an actual cassette, one of those famous cassette tapes. That one I don't think I paid $75 to edit, but they got the band to play the songs, I think.
Yeah.
So they were willing to work me in a variety of ways. I even juggled in a blacklight unitard to Black Magic Woman, because there was a blacklight ensemble that the dancers did. And so even though I was the only juggler on that ship, at least I was part of some community with the performers for about 7 weeks.
Okay.
And I should mention Tony Duncan had recommended that opportunity because he was also giving me some career advice and sharing contacts. He'd been a bit of a mentor to me when I was in my senior year of high school. He was coaching in his loft there in New York City at the time. Now he's connected to the circus school in Vermont in Brattleboro, which is great for jugglers.
Brilliant.
And he was a very advanced juggler, so it was great that he would have those coaching sessions, because that was really how I crossed the bridge when I was learning 5 clubs and 7 balls. I needed to be around a juggler like that. You couldn't just find jugglers like that quite so commonly then.
No.
Not quite so commonly who were that advanced. I mean, nowadays it's like, so what, if you want someone who juggles 7 balls or 5 clubs, you go to your local juggling club,
Yeah.
But, so that was important for me if I was going to learn as a teenager to do those skills, because you were only at the IJ for a short time of the year, right?
Yes.
And I think that was, it was my second IJ. I competed in juniors. The first one was actually held at SUNY Purchase when I was in that Antic Arts program. That was the year Alan Jacobs won. It was very exciting. I didn't know him then.
Cindy, just a quick question, Cindy. Just another quick aside. Talking about juggling on cruise ships, having slanting stages, have you had any really bad stages you've had to perform on in your career? You must have had some bad stages, low ceilings.
You want to hear about the bad stages?
Yes, I like hearing the bad stories.
Stages that were bad for touring shows, for one thing, with the way it was set up with the equipment and so on. I don't want to pick on Rutgers College because it's a very good college, but the cafeteria stage was just not appropriate. This particular show we did. I mean, it would have worked probably for one of my theme park shows, okay? Even that would have been a stretch. I don't want to pick on them. Maybe they have other venues they have access to there. You can get, stages. Sure, on ships you've got a challenge if the ship moves around.
Yeah, if the ship's not of a certain size, then the ship will move to the ocean. Yeah, and that's very hard when the ship's moving.
Outdoor stages with wind or sun that make it.
Yes.
Anything challenging to just silly.
One of the problems for me, Cindy, is that I work in very humid, hot countries like Singapore and Hong Kong in the summer, and sometimes you sweat so much that you can't hold on to your juggling clubs. They just slip out of your hands, even if I put on wristbands.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's nice about the Colorado climate here is I don't have that problem, but I remember when I did the individual prop contest, especially in Winston-Salem, because it was a bit more of that southern climate, or if I do East Coast juggling in the summer, I'm reminded of that. Around the time I did Rhapsody in Blue, I was using baby powder. I think Michael Moschen would do that too. You have to be careful it doesn't become, you don't want it to become like a soupy paste, but I was always kind of doing something in that East Coast weather. It's a good thing that it was in Baltimore because I was already acclimated with a rehearsal space with no air conditioning.
So you slap some baby powder onto your hands just to stop them sweating quite so much.
Yeah, well, because the stickiness. I hate that. When that stickiness happens, it makes it hard to release clubs. You can't slide so well.
Yeah.
And so it's one thing to be hot, but if you have that stickiness, like I said, it's not so much in the Western climate. So I had to think about that so much recently. But sometimes if I go into that climate, I do. And when I was in Japan, it wasn't in the summer, so I don't think that.
And how about Cindy?
Or I would just wipe off the clubs. That's another way to go at it.
Sorry, what was that?
You could put a little powder on the clubs.
Yes.
Wipe off the clubs
Okay.
too.
And Cindy, while we're talking about this, what about lighting? Do you have any particular requests when you turn up for a show, and if they ask you what kind of lighting you prefer?
It's a really good question because I've been asked to put together a tech rider for a family matinee type of show that an agent wants us to bring together. And so I'm going to have to come up with something. For years I was on a touring show that had a very specific tech rider, but it was also a very basic tech rider. It would basically just show what to do with the first electric and to create a general stage wash, maybe 2 settings. We would travel with some techno beams, but we would run those ourselves. It was too difficult since we did so many one-nighters to get them on board with a lot of lighting changes anyway. So we just wanted a basic kind of wash with maybe one dimmer effect. But we would also try to adjust the lights ourselves, and every situation was different, so you wouldn't necessarily want the same thing in each situation. One nice thing about working with jugglers is they'll do that for each other, right?
Yeah.
At least they'll try to get reasonably the best they can get. One reason they liked going to an off-site, we had a different school auditorium that we used for the Boulder Juggling Festival this year. It had really easy lighting, and that was refreshing. So I found my act went really well. Hopefully not just because of the lighting, but because I was on top of it this year. But it's hard when you're organizing a festival. You could get strung out by the time you get up there to perform routine. But this year it seemed to go exceptionally well, and I think I just knew the routine better. But it because I've done a lot of new routines in past years, but the lighting, if it gets spread around a bit, if you get all the source hitting you from straight on, it can be difficult.
Yeah.
Some people don't like a lot of side lights, but they know they'll be doing a lot of half pirouettes and so on. Spotlights can be okay. It kind of depends. Sometimes it's not as bad as you think. I sometimes tend to okay those if it seems a reasonable situation. Or backlighting. Jugglers like it if there's any way to get a little more light from the back, that can sort of dim those lights up front. You don't want such a blind out. I remember for years just in Lazer Vaudeville I would juggle these bouncy balls when I did 5 balls, and I wasn't so adventurous doing 5-ball tricks, partly because I knew I would always have this blind out, and I did very well. I hardly ever missed it. But I often had to really hang on because it tended to be, my 5-ball pattern tended to be just the height of those lights from the back of the house.
Yes.
They had set up there. Not always, but again, it's partly the angle. If sometimes your high throws, sometimes your throws are a bit above that line of light. But as I once remarked to my father, I said, this is like doing a piano recital if they take away half your volume so that you can't really hear.
Exactly. Exactly.
Not
Exactly.
everybody has such an obstacle. Everybody has obstacles when they perform. Usually, you might have nervousness or whatever, but you don't. And sometimes that can bring some immediacy. So I generally think, by the way, that we shouldn't fear that nervousness, and you can do. People were asking me at the BJC, they were coming over to me saying, "I'm nervous. What should I do?" And one group I think just had a very difficult routine planned, but doing some physical exercises, some breathing exercises. That's when sometimes doing those stretches, basic dance or yoga-like stretches before, can sometimes help more than frantically running through the juggling trick that you don't want to mess up right before.
Yes.
Because that's kind of addressing more what you're feeling and making you feel more grounded. I had one particular experience with that was like an awakening of how things could come together when I performed in my freshman variety show.
Oh.
Because I was doing a routine from the juniors, but I got over some of the nervousness that I'd had and was able to sort of feel very aware. Like I was within my own pattern, but I could also be aware of the audience.
Fantastic. That's something to aim for.
And also focusing on, I said this at the BJC, focusing on maybe one effect you'd like to produce for the audience so that it doesn't just get cut off into, I'm nervous for this audience, because that's not really doing something for the audience. It's not really being aware of the audience because they're not part of that. That's just in your head. So thinking, oh, I want to get them forgetting about this rainy day, or it could be something simple, or it could be, I want to show them I'm this kind of character, or I want to get across this idea that I had fun rehearsing, and just thinking about that objective, so that you change your objective there.
Yeah, I like that. I like that very much. So, that is Cindy Marvell. What a great tip for calming your nerves before a show. Just focusing on one particular effect you want to have on the audience. Well, that's Cindy, and I'm Ben, Big Ben, and I'll come back to you next week with part 2 of this interview, where we talk about Cindy's work with Lazer Vaudeville and her later career. Alright, take care guys, bye bye.